Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a campaigns officer at Cancer Research UK. Been there for over 2 years, but more importantly, in the context of this, I was our campaign lead for our general election campaign. So, our general election campaign was called Turning Point for Cancer, and a bit of a backstory to the campaign and how it came about was the situation facing cancer care in the UK has been increasingly bad over the past few years, past decade really. There are cancer waiting time targets that have been just not met for the last decade, meaning that there are lots of people affected by cancer that are waiting too long for their treatment, significant backlogs, but also various other issues in preventing cancer and the funding of cancer research. So we had a manifesto that we had launched previously that had pledges associated with it. This campaign was really transitioning our manifesto into a broader audience and mobilising people around it, which is how we got to make this general election a turning point for cancer. So, our campaign aims. So we had two broad aims. The first one being we wanted to raise awareness of our key pledges and our key policy areas with PPCs. I think this was in particular not necessarily just about, I know lots of people had pledges for their PPCs during the election, and we did as well, that people signed up to. Ours is more just about raising awareness, because we knew obviously there was going to be a high turnover, or projected high turnover, of MPs that turned out to be true, that we wanted to at least have our foot in the door off the bat with them. So raising awareness was really, really important. But secondly, we wanted to recruit new supporters, new campaigners. We've been running a different campaign for the past 2, nearly 3 years at CR UK now, leading up to the general election. So we really wanted to have a boost of a more generalised campaigning base so that we could use them to transition into new campaigning in the future. So the challenge was, how could we maximise our supporter engagement and their recruitment during a short-term campaign? Obviously, the general election was called, meaning we didn't have much time to lead in as we expected, and so everything sort of had to be scrapped and redone very, very quickly. And there was also an additional internal challenge of there was some data issues during the general election campaign that meant that we actually were not going to be able to target all of the warm audience that we had built up prior to the general election campaign, which meant that there was a more limited pot than we were initially expecting. And there were some other considerations as well. So, like I said, the supporter journey during the general election is quite difficult because it's quite a short period of time. There's not much, particularly with us, we had 5 broad pledges. There's not much time to warm people up, get people through the door, send them follow-up emails, do that engagement piece, really get them on side and engage in the campaign before you get them to email their PPCs and take higher bar actions. There's just not the time in 6 weeks, unless you've got a really great mailing list and you're able to send as many emails as you want, which we weren't able to. The second thing is obviously balancing objectives. We had 2 quite big, broad aims, so wanting to raising awareness amongst PPCs, but also wanting to recruit new supporters was quite something that we had to weigh up, because I think we, along with most other organisations, were expecting to do an email to target campaign for our to get supporters to email their candidates. So how do we balance that desire with also the fact that we really wanted to recruit new supporters and get new supporters through the door? And then the other thing is, the other last one that we really had to consider was our internal expectations. So we as a campaigns team really wanted to recruit new supporters and new campaigners. That wasn't necessarily the goal across the campaign. There was a lot of internal focus on just that pure contact rate of PPCs. And so that was quite difficult to navigate and mitigate. And And when we were considering other options, it was quite difficult to get internal buy-in for them as well. So we really had to like make the case as campaigners as to why potentially we couldn't just do that, particularly also considering like going further up in the organization, like everybody was obviously very reasonably concerned about capacity in a very short 6-week time frame. So when there was already a pre-agreement that we would do one thing, the idea that we would maybe do something a bit more complicated led to kind of more tricky conversations about capacity and how we mitigate all of that internally. But also, I guess as well, we had previously ran like paid campaigns where we had just linked to like an email to target, like getting supporters to email their MPs on different campaigns, and they had always performed significantly less well than when we do like an open letter ask. So we as a campaigns team didn't think that it would be the best use of our time and energy to just do that again, to just try and link to an email to target again. So the solution was to do a hand raiser daisy chained to our email to target action promoted by paid Facebook ads. This, I think, is quite an obvious solution, but it's not something that we'd actually ever done before. And it's also something that we came to as a result, actually, of attending Engage Networks conference last year. And part of the reason we wanted to do this talk is because one of the difficulties with making the case for this internally was that we actually didn't have that many stats on why this was a good idea beyond like, trust me, I heard somebody tell me at a conference and I believed it to be true. So hopefully as a result of this, you'll maybe have a little bit more if you ever end up in the same kind of gnarly conversations that we ended up in. So what did that actually look like? So this was the hand raiser. The hand raiser was very specifically framed around joining the campaign. It was very simple and it was very like urgent copy, urgent language. You can see like there's not many things that you need to fill in. We still obviously had to have our opt-in, and we have like a snazzy solution to, we have very like specific data that we have to collect like organizationally at Cancer Research. So we got forward action to designers the drop down that you have where you type in your postcode and then you can select your home address, so you don't have to type in every single line yourself. It's a very simple solution, but it means that the form, when you initially look at it, doesn't show like 10 fields and feels very daunting to a supporter, which was quite nice, and also like meant that on mobile it looked quite short, which was quite good. And then also as well, like we had these little drop downs because there were some very specific complicated things surrounding the devolved nations, because health is a devolved issue. So not everything that we were calling for worked for the devolved nations. And so we needed to be very, very clear about that, especially because when you're like going in with a hand raise, you don't have much time to have much information, and you need to at least have copy ready if people are going to question it. So we wanted to like lead with that as well. We didn't want to hide that away. We wanted to be very open and transparent with supporters about actually what was going to happen, particularly because then this is the daisy chain, which was only 2 extra clicks. And the way it worked was after you took the hand raiser, it would slide down. We have the little slide motion on our pages, which is very snazzy. And it was framed as, will you take your first action? So really framing this as like, you are joining the campaign, you are now a campaigner, and now this is the first action that we are asking you to take, which I think was really nice, really effective framing. And then once you pressed yes, of course, it didn't look like this on the page. I need to clarify that like all of the squiggly things, all of like the user data forenames, etc. stuff, that's just because I couldn't find a good screenshot of it at the time, so I had to go back into the page archive, and now it looks a bit more hideous than it initially did. But it took you straight to the email to send to your candidates, which you could then edit if you wanted to as a supporter. But also we had reference data in there as well, and different email headings that would pull in as well. So I think one of the various emails, like subject lines that you could have was like this many people in this constituency have been waiting too long over the past year for cancer care. And so we really utilised like the use of stats in those emails, which I think worked really, really well. But also I think because we'd done the devolved drop down and stuff, and like we'd like fronted that a bit, that meant that like when we got here, devolved candidates got a slightly different email. So like it helped to kind of like safeguard against any shocks there, basically, for why it seemed that there might be some discrepancy between the two. So yeah, you only had to do, it was only 2 extra clicks. So I think when I calculated it, you could get the whole way through the journey of sending an email to your candidates in 4 clicks, not counting typing, but like in terms of actual buttons that you had to press, it's 4 clicks, which I think is quite quick. So these were the ads as well. These ads I think were quite good, quite proud of them. I think that you can again see that they are very very simple. We didn't want to overcomplicate it. We didn't want to, use too much policy language in there, especially because we had 5 pledges. We very much worked quite hard to make sure the copy was very short and very snappy and just very mission focused and vision focused of being things need change, help change, at the very basic of it, I think was the goal. And through working with the social media team as well, they helped us build the ads. They wanted to frame very much just complete our quick form. So again, the emphasis there on people signing up was about the speed of it all, the fact that it was really, really easy, really low bar. And so very much making it very clear and simple to people while also being very, very direct and helping to even do that warming up for people before they get through the page. So in terms of how it actually went, it was quite successful. So these stats, I was rereading them before I came on stage, and I was like, oh, what did I mean by that when I wrote that down? So I'll hopefully explain. So 4,176 people took the hand raise action, and 83% of those came from paid social. One of the really useful things that the hand raiser gave us, not just on paid social but elsewhere, was that we used it with other cold audiences as well. So if there were audiences we were going out to, for example, other teams across the organisation we're going to go to that weren't campaigner audiences or weren't the main mass mailing audience, telemarketing or whatever, we would send them to the hand raiser instead of to the PPC action, because these would be people that hadn't had any experience with our policy calls. So we the rest of that 17% came from those sources. Of those, of the people that went to the hand raiser first, 65% converted to take the PPC action. This figure does jump up to 69% for paid social, and I think on one of the social assets was actually as high as I think about 75%, which was quite high, and meant that in the end we ended up having it meant that there were more people, I think, that took the action as a result of doing the hand raiser compared to when we had previously done similar actions. And then we had over 10,000 emails sent to PPCs from paid conversions, which is nearly the entire target we had for amount of emails that we wanted to send to PPCs for the entire campaign. And that was just from the conversions from paid. So in general, we managed to, just from that action alone, meet our target for recruiting supporters throughout the campaign. And I guess the main things that we've learned here are firstly, the bold message focused ads did the best. So if you remember of the 3 ads that we had, there was this one, there was one with a campaigner holding a pledge sign. That was what was on the sign. It was one of our pledges. And there was another one that was also just text-based. This prescription ad did the best, and I think it was very clear that something that stands out on your timeline, but also gets the point across very, very quickly, works better in comparison to something that you needed a little bit more context for, or that had lots of things going on in it. It was very simple, but it was very bold. And obviously linked back quite nicely to the fact that it was about healthcare. It was a really, really effective recruitment tool. We've seen since the general election as well, the people that joined us through the hand raiser have remained very active. Like they've remained engaged in our campaigns. Like when we've continued to do supporter journeys post the general election, we split out that pot of people and they still like remain engaged. And it's meant that even if there were people who didn't go on to take the PPC action, the fact that they are now on their mailing list has meant that we, after the election, were able to be like, will you now email your MP to invite them to party conferences? And a lot of them still did that, which I think has been really, really effective and really useful. The third thing was it was really useful in terms, like post the general election, like we wanted to keep the momentum building or keep having an ask, because if we'd been talking quite a lot for 6 weeks about a specific thing, we didn't just want to like stop. Like we were still like talking about like the stuff that we were talking about during the general election, but we didn't have anything for people in terms of like campaign, like clear campaign asks or clear campaign activities. So doing that hand raiser and the join the campaign like meant that we were actually quite easily able to transition into being post-election, being like, during the election we did this, you can still join the campaign, and then following up with supporters that way. We found that to be really, really effective. And the last learning was just like trust your instincts. I think that was one of the things that we learned quite quickly, was that there were lots of different people involved in the general election campaign cross-org who all had like very specific audiences in mind, very specific targets in mind. And we as campaigners like needed to like navigate all of that. But ultimately like our instincts were correct. Like doing this was a better way of reaching both of our targets. And like the instincts that we learn from like places like the like Engaging Networks conference, but also just like our instinctive campaigning instincts, are like inherent campaigning instincts and expertise are really important and really useful, and we should trust them as campaigners, especially in noisy environments. So yeah, that is all. Oh, I don't have a last slide. Cool.
Thank you, Sam. So when Outside Forces, before you, like general election campaign was coming up, so you had to run a sprint and get your stuff done quickly, and obviously all the learnings that you had. Could you transfer those to internal processes where you had perhaps more capacity and space, and you might not have actually, been forced to do that? Did you actually transfer that across into new processes?
Yeah, so I think that we have, in terms of now it's become quite standard that we do like hand raises and stuff internally, and that's become like something that people expect of us when they previously did not. And I think it has meant that we have more capacity then to do a bit more of the thinking, because people will be like, oh, it's okay. Because I think there's an instinct across the organisation to be like, what's the call to action on this post? What do we need to do? And then come to the campaigns team and be like, I need a call to action. Like, we're putting out comms, we're putting out copy about this thing. What are we supposed to say? But because of people seeing this experience internally, that there's been more like, okay, well, we have this live, and then we can give people a bit more space to like actually figure it out, which I think has been capacity building in a lot of ways and quite helpful. Like we had a different experience with the government announced that they were going to do a national cancer plan when we weren't expecting them to, and it meant that we could shift quite quickly and have more of that free time for thinking later on, because we didn't have to figure this out as much, which was nice.
You had all the experience and you could apply it from what you've done before.
Yeah.
That's good. Brilliant. So what type of audiences did you target for the paid social ads? And if you can share which audiences were the most successful in driving actions?
So actually, because of the short period of time, we didn't have time to do like very specific targeting. Like previously we'd done like specific like data briefs and stuff that like went into it. But I think it was quite broad based. Anybody that had said that they had interest in like healthcare or politics. So, or like, I think like engaged in like with Cancer Research UK before. So I think that it was quite successful just like across that broad base. I don't know if there was like any that massively stood out as being more engaged than other. But I think one of the things that I do remember was quite effective was that they did retargeting like later on in the campaign. So people that had like seen an ad but not clicked on it, that was when they got the like, there's still time to join the campaign ad. And so that I remember being quite effective, particularly when budget had been shifted into just the prescription asset. That meant that was more more engaging to people that had previously seen different versions of the campaign ads.
Okay, we have just time for one more. There are quite a few, but you can obviously grab Sam during lunch, which come up soon. Did you see any response from warm email? And it says, aware you mentioned data issues.
Do you mean like when we sent out emails to supporters? Is that what you meant? Yeah, so we just on warm emails to like during the general election. Yeah, so when we did just an email to our supporters, that did quite well in terms of like generating engagement with our PPC action as a whole. We didn't do the hand raiser in warm emails because we had previously sent them like content about it. So we thought in those specific contexts, doing the hand raiser actually was more likely to lose as people than it would gain as people, because like there were people we already had. So it wouldn't be worth linking to that and then making them go through extra steps.
Okay, brilliant. So I'd say grab Sam if you want some more context around that, or if your question has been answered. But thank you, Sam. Round of applause, please.
Thank you.